You know, it's a funny thing about relationships. You can be so in love with someone, but it still feels like you're speaking completely different languages, right? It's a frustration. I think we've all been there. And it turns out the answer might just be, well, planetary.
So today we're going to dive into a real classic, John Gray's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. We're going to start with that big metaphor, the whole Mars-Venus thing. Then we'll get into our different emotional needs and, oh yeah, how we handle stress. Spoiler, it's completely opposite. We'll even talk about how we keep score in love, which is fascinating. And of course, we'll wrap it all up with some real practical tips to build stronger connections.
Okay, so the whole book, and I mean the entire thing, is built on this one really powerful idea. It's a bit controversial, sure, but the metaphor is this. Men and women are just so fundamentally different, psychologically speaking, that it's like we're from completely separate planets.
Now, at its heart, this book isn't really about pushing stereotypes. What it's trying to do is offer a framework. A way to understand why these differences might even exist in the first place. We're talking about how we process our emotions, how we deal with stress, how we communicate, and even how we show love. So according to this whole framework, men, the Martians, are often kind of wired for problem solving, for achievement, for logic. Women, the Venetians, on the other hand, tend to prioritize things like emotional connection, nurturing, and harmony. Now the big idea here, and this is really important, isn't that one is better than the other. Not at all. It's just about accepting that we might have different operating systems, and that's the first real step to a stronger relationship.
Okay, so you might be thinking, a book from 1992? Really? Why are we still talking about this? And that's a fair question. I mean, society has changed a lot since then. But the reason it still resonates is because Gray's insights into our core emotional needs, our communication hurdles, they still really hit home for a lot of people. The idea is that the ways we process life's challenges are just, well, they're deeply rooted in our biology and psychology.
And all of this leads us to the very first and maybe most crucial takeaway of this whole framework. It's this. When we stop expecting our partners to act and think exactly like we do, and instead we learn to embrace those differences, that's when relationships don't just survive, they actually flourish.
So, if we're operating so differently, what do we actually need from each other emotionally? This question right here, this is where so many misunderstandings start. See, John Gray points out that there's a pretty distinct set of primary needs for men and for women. And when those needs aren't met, that's when you get some real friction.
Let's start with women. The framework highlights three big ones. First, the need to feel truly heard. And this is key. It's where understanding the emotion behind what's being said is way more important than finding a quick solution. Second, the need to feel appreciated, through words, through little gestures. And third, that need for a deep emotional connection, the kind that comes from really sharing experiences together. Now for men, the needs can look pretty different. There's this deep need to feel competent and respected for what they can do. Then there's the need to feel useful, which often comes out as solving problems. And this last one is so important, the need to retreat, to pull back and process tough emotions alone. It's about using space to kind of reset.
So, where does the conflict come from? Well, you can probably see it already. It happens when a guy jumps straight into fix-it mode, and suddenly his partner feels completely unheard. Or it happens when a woman tries to connect emotionally with a man who's stressed and just needs space, and he ends up feeling totally overwhelmed. And of course, it happens when a man just withdraws into silence, which can feel a lot like rejection, even if that's not what's happening at all. It's just his way of processing.
And that brings us to a really, really powerful insight. The secret here isn't trying to change your partner into a different person. Nope. It's all about understanding what they fundamentally need and then learning how to respond in a way that's actually meaningful to them.
All right, now we're getting to one of the most famous ideas from the whole book, the man cave. And it's such a perfect metaphor for one of the absolute biggest sources of friction in relationships, how we deal with stress.
So here's the deal. When men are under stress, they often retreat into what Gray calls their cave. They just need to process things in silence. Maybe they turn to distractions, like watching TV or focusing on a hobby, just to get their footing. Now, in complete contrast, women often process that same stress by talking it out. For them, connection and sharing, that's how they recharge. And you can see immediately how this sets up a classic misunderstanding, right? The man goes quiet, and his partner feels totally ignored, completely shut out. Meanwhile, the woman just needs to vent, and her partner feels all this pressure to come up with a solution, and he gets overwhelmed, when all she really wanted was for him to listen.
So what's the solution? Well, it really comes down to emotional intelligence on both sides. For men, it's about learning that just listening, just validating her feelings, that is the solution she's looking for. And for women, it's about learning to trust that when he pulls away, it's not rejection. It's just his way of hitting the reset button. This leads us to another really fascinating idea in the book. The thought that we don't just communicate differently, we actually keep score when it comes to love in totally different ways. It goes beyond just actions versus words. It's really about how those actions are valued.
Okay, so according to Gray's framework, men often show their love by doing things, by fixing stuff. They see a problem, and their go-to response, their most loving response, is to offer a solution. But women, on the other hand, often express love by sharing. They're looking for their partner to listen, to validate their feelings, not necessarily to swoop in and fix it.
And this is where the scoring system comes in. Gray suggests that men often work on a big gesture model. Buying an expensive gift might feel like it's worth, say, 50 points. But for many women, every single small, thoughtful act, a hug, a nice compliment, helping out with a chore, each one counts as 1 point. So in her book, 50 of those small gestures can be just as valuable, maybe even more so, than that one grand gesture.
So how do you balance the score? Well, the advice here is pretty straightforward. For men, it's about focusing on those small, consistent gestures that show she's on your mind, not just relying on those big, occasional efforts. And for women, it's about making sure to acknowledge and appreciate those big efforts when they happen, and recognizing the love and the intention behind them.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the theory, but what does all of this look like in the real world? Let's break down some of the key, practical strategies Gray offers for both men and women to start bridging these gaps.
All right, for the guys, the strategies are pretty clear. Number 1, practice listening without immediately trying to fix the problem. Number 2, don't be afraid to actually express your feelings with words. Seriously, words are like the glue for emotional connection. And number 3, remember the power of those small, frequent signs of affection.
And for the women, the strategies are really about perspective. First, respect his need for the cave. Try to trust that when he pulls back, it's not personal, it's not about you. Second, show some appreciation for his problem-solving mindset, even if all you really needed was to talk it out. And third, learn to see the love that he's expressing through his actions, not just through his words.
So let's circle back. Why does a framework like this, with all of its generalizations, still matter today? Because at the end of the day, its core message isn't about locking people into stereotypes. It's really a tool for building empathy. It's about giving us a common language to understand our partners better and ultimately to improve the way we connect.
All right, let's wrap this up with the final takeaways. Remember, we process emotions differently. Men often jump to solutions. Women often seek validation. Love has to be expressed in both actions and words. And those small, consistent gestures, they're what build real, lasting trust. Ultimately, when we really embrace these differences and adjust how we communicate, that's when our relationships have a genuine chance to become so much more fulfilling and deeply connected.
Because in the end, the message is actually pretty simple. The goal is never to change each other into something we're not. It's about learning, adapting, and ultimately celebrating the very things that make us unique.